Well, hey everybody, today we're going to be wrapping up our series, Everything Everywhere. And as we do that, I want to have kind of a discussion with you real quick, and I want to ask you a really important question. What do you think about when you picture the future? What do you think about when you picture the future? For example, do you feel like you're going to one day live on a space station or in outer space? Do you think you'll be teleporting to all the different places that you want to go? Or do you think that people will be marrying AI robots? You see, for me, I can remember when I was in middle school and high school, and I had this idea about what my future was going to look like. Because for me, what I thought is that, well, I had loved to do things, when I was younger, like, play baseball or basketball or things. I was really into sports, and I thought, hey, maybe one day I'll be a professional athlete, but needless to say, God didn't grace me with height or athletic ability, so neither one of those became a reality. But I remember that what happened is that I had this idea that I was going to be a lawyer. And the reason that I wanted to be a lawyer was, and I kind of mapped this out, figured out where to go to law school, the amount of money I'd make and all this stuff, but that was really the main key as to why I wanted to be a lawyer, is that I knew that I could make a lot of money. And so I believe that, there were things like I could purchase a flying car in the future, or maybe I'd have the ability to teleport, or all these great things. And here's the thing, is even if we don't consciously realize what we're doing, we spend a lot of time thinking about the future. We wonder, about what our tomorrow is going to look like, or what we're going to do tomorrow, or maybe even what our children are going to look like in the future, or maybe what just the world is going to look like. Now, as I mentioned, I thought about this a lot as a kid and, thought that I could do all these different things. But what I realized is that, I had this goal of myself. And it was kind of a weird goal that, ultimately was just about making money and about being successful. And you see, here's the thing, is as a child, thinking about the future feels fun and exciting. Because for some of you, maybe you say, well, I wanted to be an astronaut, or I wanted to be a fighter pilot. But now, when we think about the future, it feels like a lot. You could say it this way, that thinking about the future can stress us all out. Thinking about the future can stress us all out. Because for the most part, our futures are unknown. We can try, but none of us know exactly what the future is going to bring for us. Because it is everything everywhere. And we're not just exactly sure what it is. For some of us, we feel some stress over our immediate future. Our minds worry about things like, well, what's the next year of school going to be like? Or am I ever going to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend? Or what are my parents going to say about the grade I just got on that test? Or is my team going to win the next big game? But there are also bigger, more long-term stresses to worry about. You see, for some of you, maybe you feel stressed about the things that you want to change in your life. You have things that you hope will one day be different than they are right now. Let me give you a few examples. Maybe your home life isn't great, and you worry that you'll never be able to escape it. Or maybe you don't have a lot of friends, and you're afraid that maybe you'll never find people who accept you and who understand you for who you are. Or maybe you just learn differently than other people. And so you wonder, is it ever going to get easier? You see, whatever it is that you're nervous about when it comes to the future, there's this thing that kind of creeps in because you're worried that it won't bring the change that you want to see. Now, for others of you, maybe it's the exact opposite. Because maybe your stress about the future has to do with the fact that you don't want things to change. You say things like, well, I love the way my life looks right now. Or I'm happy with my family and my friend group and my school and my team, and all those things are going great. And why would I want any of that to change? Because when you think about the future, you're stressed by the thought that things won't always be the way that they are right now. You see, wherever your stress comes from, there's one thing that's true for all of us. We can't control our circumstances. Sure, we can make choices and we can make decisions that impact our future in a positive way, and we should do that. But things are going to happen in our future, both good and bad, that we have absolutely no control over. We can't predict them, we can't prepare for them, and we can't possibly know how it's all going to turn out. Now, that's a really tough thing to grasp, right? So what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to face a future that we have no control over? And how are we supposed to stay stress-free in the present when we have no idea what our future is actually going to look like? Well, there's an incredible story that's recorded in the Bible that can help us out. You see, there were a couple guys who were in a situation where they had zero control over what was going to happen next. And I think as we look through this story, what we can discover is that we can learn a lot by watching how they handled the stress they were in that was brought on by an uncertain future. Now, the two guys that we're going to look at are Paul and Silas. Now, these two had placed their faith in Jesus. They had dedicated their lives to traveling from city to city, telling other people the good news about Jesus. And their journey is actually recorded in the New Testament book of Acts. But during their ministry, they encountered some kind of difficult things. For example, Paul and Silas eventually made their way to a city called Philippi. And that's now in what we know as modern-day Greece. And they come across a girl who is owned by some guys who made money off of her. And the way that this lady made money is that she predicted the future. The Bible actually says that she was possessed by an evil spirit that gave her the ability to predict the future. And so she was enslaved by evil people who wanted to make money off of her and evil spirits that were being used to make them a profit. In other words, this girl was miserable. And the Apostle Paul, as he comes on to this situation, he has compassion on her and he prays in Jesus' name that she would be set free from the evil spirits. And here's the thing, God answered that prayer. He sent the spirit out of her. And can you imagine the type of freedom that this girl would have experienced? I mean, it was a beautiful, liberating moment for her. But the men that owned her, they weren't celebrating like she was. See, her evil spirit was their moneymaker. And so they were really mad. And so what did they do? They had Paul and Silas beaten and thrown into prison. But this wasn't just any old prison. The jailer places Paul and Silas in the innermost cell and chains their feet to the floor. They had a guard that was assigned to them 24 hours a day, all day long, to make sure they didn't try to escape. So in other words, you could say, well, they're in a situation and they have zero control over their circumstances. It was definitely an everything, everywhere experience. And in this super stressful moment, what did Paul and Silas do? Well, in Acts 16, we read that it says about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying. Now, listen, I know that some of you may not even be sure about all this God stuff, but I think if any of us were in that situation where we were in an innermost cell with our feet chained to the floor, not knowing what was going to happen next, we'd be sending up some pretty desperate prayers. We'd be asking, God, get me out of this mess. And maybe chances are you've prayed some of these prayers already, where you've been in a stressful situation. And I mean, I've never seen people pray harder than when the kicker is lining up for a game-winning field goal. But Paul and Silas weren't praying a desperate prayer. They were praying prayers that seemed unusual considering their circumstances, because they were praying prayers that were full of hope. And here's what it says in Acts 16, verse 25. It says, about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God. Now, these guys were full on singing while they were in prison. They were chained up. They were beaten up. Their future didn't look up. But there was so much that was unknown. Like, how long would they be there? Would they ever be released? Were they going to be beaten again tomorrow? In other words, their future was absolutely uncertain. But in the middle of that uncertainty, they chose joy. In the middle of that uncertainty, they chose joy. In that super stressful moment, they turned their attention towards prayer and praise. Now, as you think about this, I want you to think about the alarm on your phone. And chances are you probably use that oftentimes maybe as an alarm clock or maybe for different things to remind you of. And here's the thing, is maybe for some of you, you need to use that alarm in a different way. So let me ask you to do this. What if every time you felt unsure about your future, you had an alarm that went off in your mind reminding you to praise God like Paul and Silas did? Like, for example, when you say, I'm starting to feel worried about tomorrow, and you set that alarm off, it's a cue to praise God. Or maybe you say, well, I feel stressed about next year, and that alarm goes off again. That's an indicator for you to worship God. Because in the middle of a dark prison, there was an alarm for Paul and Silas. And here's what they teach us: that when everything is everywhere, joy is always a choice. When everything is everywhere, joy is always a choice. Now, Paul and Silas, they had little control over their current circumstances. They had even less control over their futures, but they had complete control over their attitudes. And instead of choosing stress and fear and hopelessness, they chose to be joyful. They chose to turn to God, who they trusted both with their present and with their future. Now, if this were the end of the story, it would have been good enough, right? But right in the middle of Paul and Silas's worship set, something crazy happens. There's an earthquake that shook the entire jail, that knocked open every door of every prisoner's cell, and it broke loose the chains that they were all being bound with. And just like that, the jailer goes from being in a position of security and feeling pretty good about himself to being worried about his own future. Because if all the prisoners escaped, he would certainly be put to death. And all of a sudden, everything was everywhere to him. He was so consumed with worry about what might happen next that he literally reaches and pulls his sword and is about to kill himself when Paul shouts to let him know, hey, we're all still here. And the guard was so amazed by Paul and Silas and how they carried themselves that he literally fell down in front of them and asked them, what must I do to be saved? Right then and there, the prison guard puts his faith in Jesus, all because of the way that he saw Paul and Silas respond to an uncertain future. And that's the other lesson I think we can learn from Paul and Silas, is that when you choose joy, you never know how it may affect and inspire others. When you choose joy, you never know how it may affect and inspire others. Because choosing joy doesn't take away all the uncertainty, but I do think it can help us navigate the stress that we feel in unknown circumstances. For example, it doesn't mean putting on a pretend smile or being fake or pretending that everything's okay when you're not. Sometimes choosing joy doesn't feel possible. And sometimes maybe you need to get help from somebody else, like a trusted adult. That could be a great first step when it comes to navigating all the things that are related to your stress. So choosing joy doesn't mean pretending that everything is perfect, but it does mean finding hope in the fact that God has control over your future. It's choosing to focus on the fact that while your future may be uncertain to you, God knows exactly what's ahead. And because of that, you can find joy in Him. You see, in light of all of this, here's what I'd like for you to do. First thing is identify a situation in your life right now that feels like a prison. Identify a situation in your life right now that feels like a prison. In other words, is there something that you have no control over? Something that feels like a lot? Maybe part of your future that you're unsure of or uncertain about. And as you think about that particular situation, that prison type moment, I want you to ask yourself these two questions. What, if anything, can you control about that situation? What, if anything, can you control about this situation? Is there anything that you can do? Are there some simple steps that you can take to at least help the situation get a little bit better? And then second, how can I choose joy in this situation? How can I choose joy in this situation? What would it look like for you to trust God, to put your hope in God, and to choose joy right now, even before you know how the circumstances are going to turn out? Now, here's the thing, is I'm not saying it's going to be easy to do that all the time. Some of us are better with dealing with unknown things than others. But I do know that it's possible to choose joy in the face of an uncertain future, just like Paul and Silas did. Because when everything is everywhere, joy is always a choice. So I hope you'll try choosing joy in your stress and in your unknowns this week. Because not only will it make a difference in your life, you never know who else's life may be impacted for the better. Now, a great way to do this is to talk with your small group, which is a reason that we emphasize, coming here in person, because we want you to know that you can talk to these people about this. Because you're not the only one in your circle worrying about the unknown or stressing about the future. And talking about your stressors with people who love and care about you is a good start to figure out what joy looks like in your life right now. So as we wrap this up today, I want to ask you this question. What's one way I can choose joy this week? What's one way I can choose joy this week? Well, thank you so much for checking out our final installment of our series, Everything Everywhere. We hope that it's been an encouragement to you as we've tackled over these last couple weeks the topics of stress and worry, because ultimately we want you to have people to talk to about those things in your life. We know that it can be scary and life can be full of stress and it can be full of worry, and that's one of the reasons we encourage you to come in person. Again, we meet from 6 to 8 p.m. in the youth room at New Hope Church. We'd love to see you in person because we want you to connect with our small group leaders, with our small groups, with me, people who love and care about you and who desire to see what's best for you. Because ultimately, we want you to work through the stress and the worry in your lives so that they don't lead to something more serious like depression or anxiety. So again, we thank you so much for checking out this final installment of our series, Everything Everywhere, and we hope to see you soon.